I'm with Gary Reynolds, Chief Investment Officer at Courtiers, to find out what's been on his mind recently and what he's focused on for the near future. Gary, Magnificent Seven, if I may. You released a research note, which we published early March, that made quite clear the returns of the Mag 7 in 2023 versus 2024. 23, 111%, 2024, 51%. Is this trend continuing?
It's not been too good for the first quarter of 2025, although we're not to the end yet. And on my feet at the client seminars in December, I did say, which is recorded, that the Mag 7 would underperform the market in 2025. And then I realised that you shouldn't do that, because you shouldn't. There's the two rules when you're giving predictions, which is if you give a figure, don't give a date. And if you give a date, don't give a figure. Well, I said 2025, so there's the date, and I said that underperformed, there's the figure. So at the moment, I feel like the man that's jumped out of an aeroplane saying he can survive the 1,000-metre drop without a parachute. And someone's come on the radio and says, "How's it going?" As I'm halfway down, and I'm saying, so far, so good. So we've got Mag 7 off collectively, around about 11% so far this year, and Tesla off over 40%.
You were saying some of the reasons the profits were so high is because of investors piling into the companies and driving up the prices.
Yeah, there's a tendency for human beings to have a fear of missing out. So when they see an asset class doing very well, those that have not bought in at the start to pile in. It drives the values higher. Those that are in staying because they think it's a one-way ride going up, and those that have still not got in buy in until you've got nobody else. And this is the classic way in which bubbles have happened throughout history. When you're in that type of environment, it requires a thing which is called the even bigger fool. In other words, if you're in, you're relying on somebody else coming in to buy your shares off of you at a big profit in the future. Now, the difference between the Magnificent Seven bubble that has happened in the past 2 or 3 years and what happened with the tech bubble in the late 90s. In the late 90s, most of those companies that were getting bought up weren't making anything or actually generating any profits or cash. The Mag 7, at least when you look at them collectively, make money. But as we saw with DeepSeek when it came along to challenge NVIDIA with regard the cost of delivering AI, the next company, the next good idea threatens the existing best idea, and that can rattle the share price. So what people had to believe with the Mag 7, which I put in the article, was that not only would these companies deliver earnings growth, i.e. grow their profits at the same rate they had over the last 10 years, they would actually accelerate it. And frankly, that's not going to happen.
Is there anything like DeepSeek since that came out? Is there anything causing ripples that might encourage these downturns to persist?
Well, one thing that is obvious is the way in which China is driving down the price of electric cars, which is posing a massive challenge to Tesla. Tesla is now trying to launch new models around the $30,000 mark, so they're affordable, bearing in mind that Tesla is really a prestige electric vehicle. But companies like BYD in China are doing it cheaper. They've got a wealth of cheap labour, but they're also at the forefront on technology. So what I would say Tesla has a problem with as well at the moment is that whilst their CEO is off doing Doge and running X, he's stretching himself, and whilst this is happening, Tesla is looking really shaky with regard to its new car sales. So different things can come along. Hubris could affect a company, a challenger can come along. And as I said in the article, when you look at how well Apple has done, it was nearly bankrupt in 97. If you looked at the spring of 97, you'd have been astounded where Apple was going to be by the spring of 2025. And had their founder, Steve Jobs, not come back, it's doubtful Apple would have survived this long. Google was an idea in an academic paper in '98. Point being, Leo, who knows what is out there that's going to challenge the existing 7? But I look at it like this. Anyone who loves that film, The Magnificent Seven, which I do, will recall that only 3 of them survived. One of them went back to doing what he was, a farmer. 2 of the other guys, Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen, rode out to continue as gunslinging cowboys, and the rest of them, Robert Vaughan, Charles Bronson, were killed. And I suspect that ratio in 10 years' time will look about similar. Yes, there'll be a couple that are still there doing well, behaving like a utility company, delivering cash. But if you can pick them, if you know who's going to survive and know who's going to get shot, good luck, because that's the way you'll make money with them.
Sticking to the US, how are you seeing markets reacting to the likes of Trump imposing tariffs? Is that affecting the economy, spending appetites, for example, in the US?
We've had some questions on this, and the question is, how do tariffs work, and why are tariffs bad? Now, I'm going to put something out with a little bit more detail, based on the stuff the British economist David Ricardo covered trading a long time ago. And as it happens, you're talking here. If I look back here, I can find you lots of books in these shelves which will advocate free trade. There's one right there for Churchill, and by the way, I've not positioned it there knowing you were going to ask this question, but it's been there always. For free trade, it's called, written at the start of the last century. So the idea is that you should trade in what you have a comparative advantage, and tariffs are generally very, very bad. If you were a Brexiteer, you should be a big advocate of Patrick Minford, who was the poster economist for the Brexit movement, very anti-tariffs, thinks that we should tear them all up and trade because it's the tariff, the country that puts the tariff on that suffers in the long term. So let's just look at that for a minute. Trump introduces tariffs, sees them as a way of raising taxes to perhaps give tax cuts otherwhere. Who bears the cost of that tariff? So let's say you've got a Chinese computer coming into the US at $500, and Trump says there's going to be a 20% tariff on that, an extra $100 on that computer. Who pays? Does the Chinese company put it onto the computer cost, in which case the American consumer now has to pay $600 for a product that should cost $500, or does China absorb it? In which case it still costs $500, the American government charged a tariff, and it boosts the government coffers in the US, while having no effect on the price of that product to the consumer. Now, if China bears it, not so bad for the US. But if the US, if it gets put on the price, then the buyer of that $500 Chinese computer has 2 choices. Pay $600 for it, or find an alternative American product. If the alternative American product is $550, it's still a 10% price increase, and that will drive inflation. Not only that, it means that the US is now not benefiting from the Chinese expertise, which is the fact that we've got specialisation throughout the world makes products cheaper for everybody. So the tariff issuers cut across the whole idea of specialisation, and it doesn't work. And the one thing I would say with regard the Trump administration and MAGA, America is great. It's a wonderful economy. It's a brilliant country. Loads of people want to be there because it is such a great place to live. You didn't need to make it great again. It was already great again. But you just hope that the tariffs don't spoil it too much.
Well, let's bring it back home. The UK's search for growth. How are we doing?
Not very good. That October budget was a car crash. I'm hoping they realise this so that the spring update isn't too catastrophic, which we're going to get next week. I think what the government's failed to understand is that people are emotional, they do things, they buy things, they go out and have experiences, all of which boost the economy when they're feeling positive. If you make people feel negative, they will tighten the belt, spend less going out to eat, buy less consumer products and save more. So what you've got in the UK at the moment, long-term savings ratio, the amount of disposable income that families save is just over 7%. Currently, the saving rate's at 10. Going up to the global financial crisis, the savings rate had dropped to 5. Far too low, but it showed you the amount of optimism that there was in the economy and how that was misplaced. Now, you've got too much pessimism out there. People are saving most. And she's got to do something to get the British households to feel better about perhaps spending a bit more, and they can drop their savings rate by 2 or 3%, return to the long-term average, and it will give the economy a really, really good boost, or even better, leverage a bit more. So I'll give you another example. The level of household debt to GDP before the global financial crisis, so we're going back to the mid-noughties, was around 108%. Now it's 80%. Families have paid down over 25% of GDP in debt post the global financial crisis. So families have got scope to reduce savings and boost consumption and use and stop deleveraging. In other words, borrow a little bit more to boost consumption. So she's got to unlock what is available to her. And so far, there's not been many good ideas coming out of 10 or 11 Downing Street.
Optimistic for the spring statement or sitting tight?
I've noticed that the 22 billion black hole is being focused on again by the government, and that would normally be something they do as a precursor to delivering more bad news. In other words, I'm sorry we've got to tax you even more, it's the Tories' fault. Now that is not true, and I'm not saying that because I'm not a Conservative Party member, I didn't even vote for them at the last election, but what I am saying is I'm not optimistic on that budget delivering good news. What I am optimistic about is the ingenuity of the British people and the fact that in the end it's the decisions made by households every day that will boost things, and they have got scope to make those improvements. And if a party in opposition came up with something a bit more radical than simply pointing fingers at what this government are doing, and there's loads of scope for doing that here, then that would be good. And I suspect, as it always happened to this country throughout history, eventually somebody pops their head up and says, let's do this, and off we go again on a new positive cycle.
Well, we'll be keen for your initial reaction straight after the statement on the 26th, so we'll look forward to hearing your thoughts after Rachel Reeves has presented it. Alright Gary, thank you. We'll leave it there for now and look forward to your more in-depth look at tariffs and impact on the economy there. Thank you for watching. If you do have any questions, please speak to your advisor, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.